Hello everyone, welcome to Art History. Over the course of the next semester, we're going to go back to the very earliest known art, and we're going to look at some of the artwork, maybe make some guesses as to the motivation of why that work was made, and we're going to follow that thread of history all the way up until the time right before the Renaissance, in which there was a great revolution in the world of art. Now, this early art history is a fascinating time because what we will find is that even though human beings in their societies have differed widely throughout the world in the areas that we will be studying, the creation of art has remained a constant. In this video, I'm going to take a little time to explain how the course works and to give you some basic guidelines. Also, we'll take a whirlwind tour through some of the areas that we'll be studying over the next semester. But before we get into all of that, I'd like to take a few moments and just simply introduce myself. Hi everybody! My name is Cynthia Dollard and I will be your instructor for this course. I teach studio classes at North Ark in addition to teaching and writing online classes at North Ark and at another school. So it is my delight to see all of you online, and I hope to see any of you in person that want to come by the art room. Details on that will be posted. So here I am. This is my art studio. I live nearby, a short walk away, in the Ozark Mountains, near Harrison, but not quite in Harrison. I love my home. I love the forest. I live with both four-leggeds and two-leggeds, and in addition to teaching, I am an active working artist. I really love to make art. In fact, it keeps me balanced more than anything else. And I also like to make music and play music with friends. So here I am. Hello, everybody. You can picture me like this, but I have a feeling there will be some days when maybe you need a little something to cheer you up, or you're feeling a little overwhelmed by work or whatever. And on those days, I'd like to ask you to picture me in a slightly different way. So how about it? What do you think? This is called Self-Portrait as an Elehuman. And I think if I get a little bit of that self-important look, perhaps there is a slight likeness. This was actually just done in fun as a project a few years ago, and we still do a project similar to this in my drawing classes. So, okay, you can picture me like this, you can think of my face, or I have one more idea to run past you. Here's Home Sweet Home, which I'm privileged to share with a great family, four-leggeds, two-leggeds. I live in the mountains, as I said, right on the edge of a bluff. And I really love my home. I love the city as well, and I like to bounce back and forth between the great relaxation of the mountains and the fun and excitement and artistic, all the artistic things that are happening in a city. Now, let's talk about the course, shall we? Well, all right, so first thing would be, what are we going to do? How does it work? Well, my online courses are actually quite simple. And if it seems confusing, that just means that you need a little more explanation, or you probably need to send me an email. Here's how it works. Every week, the classes start on Monday and end on Monday, the class weeks. So that means that all of your assignments are due by Monday at midnight. And every Monday, the next week's assignments are going to be listed. And every week we'll have basically the same thing. It would go like read a chapter, do a very simple quiz to make sure that you get the most important points, listen to an audio lecture by me, and then we have a whole slew of interesting YouTube videos. Usually these are under 10 minutes long, often under 5 minutes long, but I have found that looking at videos like this provides an opportunity for you to experience art from such a variety of different angles. They're a very useful part of the course, so watch them. Now, another important part of our course is our discussion. Each week, on Monday, there is a new discussion question posted. And listen carefully, this is how it works. I will ask you a question, and you will respond to me And ideally, for the full 10 points, you will respond to me by Friday night at midnight. Okay? Now, then you will also, sometime in that week, you will respond to 2 classmates. So you answer my question, and then you respond to a couple of classmates and how they have answered the question. That way you are actually having a discussion. Now these need to be done during the time that they're assigned, obviously, and if you post earlier in the week, it's a lot better discussion. So that's that. Now in addition to this weekly, let me just review, weekly, there'll be reading, a short quiz, some videos, and a discussion. That's it. Easy as can be. And then you'll have a couple of additional assignments, and they're fun, trust me, to expand your mind and, make you think outside the box a little bit. The way to best succeed in an online course has been proven is to set aside time, almost as if you were in a seated course. For this class, I recommend at least 2 hours a week, and sometimes you might need 3 hours a week. This is comparable to what you would have in a seated course. Now, during your class time, whenever it is, if it's 11 at night, 10 in the morning, who cares? Whenever it works for you, then you turn off the phone, shut the door, become unavailable for everything else. Now you might break this up through the week or you might do it all at once. This is up to you to decide, but it will really work. So if you are able to do this, then you'll succeed in the course and we'll have a good time along the way. Now let's take a few minutes and look at what in the world we're going to be studying over the next semester. Well, we're going to start with some of the earliest artwork ever made. And this to me is fascinating. 25 to 30,000 years ago, early humans, and now they've just recently said it might have been Neanderthals also, went way back into caves. Now, if you stop for a minute and think about it, they had lights that were just moss and animal fat on a rock, and they carried these far back in a cave. If they lost their light, they would probably lose their life. And they would climb up on these scaffolds that they would build while they were in there, and then they would put these images on the walls and walk out, leaving this beautiful artwork in the darkness. Sometimes they would just put handprints on the wall. They're really fascinating. So there's a lot more about the earliest art, and we'll get into that in our first semester. We'll go from prehistoric art to Egyptian art, which is quite different. Egyptian art, they left a large record really for us, and mostly they did that because they were very concerned with leaving art for the afterlife, for after you died. So almost all of their artwork that we have today was carved or constructed so that the rulers could be taken care of in the afterlife. We'll move from that to Mesopotamia. These are the Ishtar gates, by the way, from Babylonia. The temples of Babylon and all that. Well, when we look at Mesopotamia, what we'll find is that it's a very sophisticated culture that really gave us a lot of the things that we take for granted today, like the 365-day year, beer, poetry as we know it today, and on and on. Now these gates are an interesting story because they're from Babylon, which is in modern-day Iraq and Iran, but these gates that we're looking at are in the Berlin Museum in Germany. They were taken in the early part of the 20th century. So this gives rise to one of our early discussion questions, which will explore the way that throughout history great treasures have been stolen in wartime. And it's a complex question, but again, you'll have to just stay tuned for that. So we'll go from Mesopotamia to ancient Greece. And with Greece, then we begin to start to look at art that is a lot more familiar to us, that is maybe the roots of our modern Western civilization. What happened with Greece is that they went through 3 main periods of art, 2 of which we are seeing here. The earliest is called Archaic, and it looks a lot like it looks a lot like Egyptian sculpture, actually. So here we have the Classical period and the Hellenistic. It's quite a contrast, isn't it? With the one on the left, the human form is idealized, and with the one on the right, the idealism is starting to crack a bit, and this kind of hyper emotional realism was depicted by the ancient Greeks. So we'll move right from Greece to Rome, and Rome and Greece are fun to compare as they're actually quite different, although the art can be quite similar to the untrained observer. Now, in Rome, there's a lot more emphasis on acquisition, power, wealth, conquest of lands, and as we see here, there's a great emphasis on fashion. I mean, check this out. In addition to this being a crazy hairstyle from the Flavian period, it's also an amazing sculpture. I think, how did they make the rocks make ringlets, especially with the tools that they had at hand? So Rome is a lot more about the common people, or the depictions of people as they are, and Greece is a lot more about idealized humanity. So from there, let's jump forward into the early medieval period. Now, this is a fascinating period in art. With the turn of the millennium after the death of Christ, art moved pretty far away from realism for about 1400 years. And in this idealization, or this less realistic sort of abstract way of making people, of doing art and of depicting people, they became more kind of idealistic. This is a mosaic, so this is tiles that are laid in to make a pattern. Now, this had a dual purpose. In addition to being beautiful to look at, it was telling a story. With the early Christianity, the spread of Christianity after the millennium, most people were illiterate, and they had to learn the stories of the new religion. So most of this art was made in order to help tell the stories, because as they, you've heard a picture worth 1,000 words. That's probably especially true if you can't read. So let's move on, shall we? Here we're going to pop forward into the Gothic period. Now, this is another fascinating period. Maybe I say they're all fascinating because they are. But in this time period, the churches or cathedrals were built ever higher and higher and higher to go up towards heaven. And also during this period, there were great pilgrimages where people would travel far and wide to go see a relic or to visit the churches, which were supported by the traveling pilgrims and by taxing the common people. Now, what's interesting about this time is that even as life on Earth was actually pretty challenging, there was an ever more urge to create churches that went higher and higher. And of course, many of them fell in, and then they would just start over again. So the technology and the engineering was created in order to let the churches go higher and higher up towards heaven. Some of these took 100 years, 150 years to build, and then maybe there would be a fire or a collapse, but people just kept building. So let's finish up our whirlwind tour by talking about what we call the Proto Renaissance, or the time right before the Renaissance. Now, this is a depiction by the great artist Giotto, and he's fascinating because all around him artwork was being made that had the form of the humans much more stylized or abstract, or you could say doesn't look good if you really want it to be realistic. And along comes Giotto, and suddenly he can see the nuances of form, the subtleties of shadow. One more interesting fact about this guy is that he was a follower of Saint Francis, who changed the Catholic religion quite radically. Instead of holding that priests were in a really high station and maybe almost should be treated as royalty, Saint Francis said that it was the natural world where we really should get our inspiration. And Giotto was what we call a lay monk. So he could live as a husband and a father, but he was also very dedicated to this new Franciscan religion. And I always wonder if that helped him to depict humans so realistically. So now to end our slideshow, here's one more. Oh, look at that. Now, almost anything could be art. It depends on what you call it. You could just call it art. for our final project, you're going to have an opportunity to make a work of art, and you'll have a whole bunch of options. And actually, to be honest, this is probably not one of them. I just liked the picture. I will say, though, that what it brings to mind also is that I'm going to ask all of you to remain open-minded. People like to make fun of the artist Jackson Pollock because he's the first one who threw paint on canvases and called it art. But I have seen some of his masterworks, and they were so moving. It really changed my opinion of this work because actually they were pretty finely crafted. So anyway, with this in mind, the fact that everyone does have an artist within them to some degree, let's jump into the course, sharpen your pencils, so to speak, and get ready for a fun adventure exploring the world of the history of art. I look forward to sharing this semester with all of you, and as always, thanks for listening.